The autumn morning had started like any other at the Riverside Shopping Plaza. The parking lot was buzzing with its usual weekend activity as Marcus Johnson, a 34-year-old software engineer, pulled his navy blue Honda Civic into the crowded lot. He had promised his daughter Emma that he would pick up a special Kate for her 10th birthday party later that afternoon. The digital clock on his dashboard read 10:45 a.m. as he circled the lot for the third time. Finally, he spotted an empty space near the entrance of Sweet Dreams Bakery. As he carefully maneuvered his car into the spot, he noticed a black SUV in his rearview mirror but thought nothing of it. The space was clearly available, and he had arrived first. Marcus gathered his phone and wallet, double-checking his daughter's cake order details on his phone. Just as he stepped out of his car, he heard the angry rev of an engine and the slam of a car door. Before he could fully process what was happening, a sharp, hostile voice cut through the air. "Hey you, yes, you, I was waiting for that spot." Marcus turned to see a middle-aged white woman marching toward him. Her blonde hair was styled in an expensive-looking bob, and her designer sunglasses sat perched on her head. She held her phone out in front of her, obviously recording, while her other hand clutched an oversized leather purse. "Ma'am, I didn't see anyone waiting," Marcus responded calmly, already feeling his heart rate increase. He'd been in situations like this before and knew how quickly they could escalate. There are plenty of spots available just a few rows back. The woman, who would soon become known across social media as Parking Lot Karen, moved closer, her face reddening with each step. "Don't you mayhem me. You people are always trying to take what isn't yours." Several shoppers nearby stopped in their tracks, and Marcus noticed a young couple at the bakery window pull out their phones. He took a deep breath, remembering the conversations he'd had with his daughter about handling difficult situations with grace. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice steady, "I'm just here to pick up a birthday cake for my daughter. I didn't see you waiting for this spot, but if it's that important to you—" "Your daughter?" Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm sure she's just as entitled as you are." She then launched into a series of racial slurs that made nearby shoppers gasp. Marcus felt a familiar knot in his stomach, the same one he felt countless times before when faced with such blatant racism, but years of experience had taught him how to handle these situations. He calmly pulled out his own phone and began recording. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back," he said firmly. "You're creating a scene, and your language is inappropriate." Karen's eyes widened with indignation. "Are you threatening me? Did everyone see that? This man is threatening me." She waved her phone around wildly, trying to capture the attention of other shoppers. By now, a small crowd had gathered. An elderly woman shook her head in disapproval, not at Marcus, but at Karen. A teenage boy on his skateboard had stopped and was live-streaming the entire incident. Two middle-aged men stepped closer to Marcus, wordlessly offering their support. "Ma'am, please calm down," one of the men said. "We all saw what happened. He parked here fair and square." Karen spun around, her designer purse swinging wildly. "Mind your own business. This is between me and him." She turned back to Marcus, her finger jabbing the air inches from his face. "You think you can just come here and—" Before she could finish her sentence, the store manager of Sweet Dreams Bakery emerged from the shop. Angela Chen, a woman in her early 40s who had owned the bakery for 15 years, had seen the entire incident unfold through her store window. "Is there a problem here?" Angela asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to handling difficult situations. She positioned herself between Marcus and Karen, her arms crossed. The morning sun beat down on the growing crowd as tension filled the air. Marcus checked his watch. It had only been 5 minutes since he parked his car, but it felt like an eternity. He could only imagine how the situation would unfold, not knowing that in just 15 more minutes, everything would change dramatically. To be continued in Part 2. Angela Chen's presence seemed to fuel Karen's anger rather than calm it. "Oh, so you're all gaining up on me now," she shouted, her face growing redder by the minute. The phone in her hand shook as she tried to record everyone around her. "No one is gaining up on anyone," Angela replied firmly. "But I've watched this entire situation unfold, and I must ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing our customers." The bakery owner gestured toward the shop window, where several concerned faces peered out, including 2 young children who pressed their noses against the glass. Marcus stood quietly, still recording on his phone. His daughter Emma's voice echoed in his head from a conversation they'd had just last week. Dad, you always say that staying calm is like having a superpower. He allowed himself a small smile, proud that his 10-year-old was already wiser than many adults. Karen's attention snapped back to Marcus when she noticed his smile. Oh, you think this is funny? You're smirking at me. She stepped closer, her designer heels clicking aggressively on the asphalt. All of you know my husband is a lawyer, and I'm on the board off. Ma'am, a deep voice interrupted. It belonged to James Wilson, the shopping plaza's security guard, who had finally arrived after being alerted by one of the shop owners. I need you to step back and lower your voice immediately. The crowd had grown to about 20 people now, with more joining every minute. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. A young woman in scrubs who had just parked her car approached the group, concern evident on her face as she assessed the situation. Karen's breathing had become noticeably labored, but her rage seemed to overshadow any awareness of her physical state. You can't tell me what to do. I've been shopping here for 15 years. I demand to speak to your supervisor. James remained professional but firm. Ma'am, I represent the plaza management. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment of any kind. Several witnesses have reported that you've been using racial slurs and threatening behavior. Threatening? He's the one who threatened me. Karen spun around, nearly losing her balance. Her designer sunglasses fell from her head and clattered to the ground. When she bent to retrieve them, her movements were jerky and uncoordinated. The nurse in scrubs took a step forward, her professional instincts kicking in. Ma'am, are you feeling all right? You seem to be having trouble breathing. Indeed, Karen's face had taken on an alarming shade of purple, and her chest heaved with each breath. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the mild temperature, yet she continued her tirade, now directing her anger at multiple targets. All of you, conspiring against me, I'll sue every one of you. Her words came out between gasps. This plaza, this neighborhood, it's all gone downhill since. She couldn't finish her sentence as she clutched her chest. Marcus noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. Despite everything she had said and done, his human instincts kicked in. I think she needs help, he said to the nurse, who was already moving closer to Karen. Get away from me. Karen tried to shout, but her voice came out weak and shaky. She took a stumbling step backward, her expensive heel catching in a crack in the pavement. Her legs wobbled, and her eyes grew wide with sudden fear. The nurse lunged forward just as Karen's knees buckled. Someone call 911. She shouted, helping to ease Karen to the ground. The same crowd that had gathered to witness her racism now moved in with concern, though maintaining a respectful distance. Marcus quickly dialed emergency services, his voice clear and calm as he reported their location. Angela rushed back into her bakery to grab some water and a clean towel. James, the security guard, began directing traffic away from the scene to make room for the approaching ambulance. As Karen lay on the ground, her previous rage gave way to visible fear. The nurse held her hand, checking her pulse while speaking in soothing tones. For a brief moment, Karen's eyes met Marcus's, and something shifted in her expression, a flicker of shame, perhaps, or recognition of her own humanity reflected in the compassion of those she had just been attacking. The distant wail of sirens grew closer as the morning sun continued to climb in the sky. No one in the crowd could have predicted how this confrontation would end, but the next few minutes would prove to be even more revealing. To be continued in Part 3. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its flashing lights casting red and white patterns across the faces of concerned onlookers. Two paramedics, Sarah Martinez and Tom Chen, quickly assessed the situation as they approached Karen, who now lay on the ground looking significantly less threatening than she had just moments before. She's experiencing chest pain and shortness of breath, the nurse in scrubs, who introduced herself as Michelle Parker, explained professionally. Pulse is rapid, and she showed signs of anxiety before collapsing. As the paramedics began their work, Karen's phone lay forgotten on the ground, still recording. Marcus picked it up and carefully turned off the recording, placing it safely beside her purse. It was a small gesture of kindness that didn't go unnoticed by the crowd. Blood pressure is 160/95, Sarah announced, removing the blood pressure cuff. Ma'am, can you tell me your full name? Karen Whitfield, she managed between shallow breaths. Her previously rage-filled face now showed fear and vulnerability. The designer makeup she wore had begun to streak with sweat and tears. Tom placed an oxygen mask over her face while Sarah prepared an EKG. The surrounding crowd had grown quieter, the earlier tension replaced by genuine concern. Even those who had been recording the confrontation had lowered their phones out of respect for Karen's medical privacy. Angela Chen emerged from her bakery again, this time carrying a cold bottle of water and a small fan. "The paramedics might need these," she said softly, handing them to Michelle, who had stayed to assist. As the medical team worked, a new voice called out from the crowd. "Mom? Mom!" A young man in his early 20s pushed through the gathered onlookers. His face drained of color when he saw Karen on the ground. "I'm her son," he explained breathlessly to the paramedics. "I work at the coffee shop across the plaza. Someone came in and told me what was happening." He knelt beside his mother, taking her hand. The contrast between his gentle concern and his mother's earlier behavior was striking. Karen's eyes filled with tears when she saw her son. She tried to speak through the oxygen mask, but he shushed her gently. "It's okay, Mom. Just breathe." Marcus watched the scene unfold, still standing near his car. He thought about his own daughter Emma waiting at home, excited about her birthday cake. The whole incident had started over something as trivial as a parking spot, and now here they were, witnessing a family's private crisis in public. "Sir," Karen's son addressed Marcus suddenly, standing up. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry for my mother's behavior. She's been under a lot of stress lately, but that's no excuse for." "It's all right," Marcus interrupted gently. "Right now, your mother needs you. That's what's important." The young man's eyes welled up with tears. The shame of his mother's actions and gratitude for Marcus's compassion seemed to overwhelm him. He nodded silently before returning to his mother's side. The paramedics had finished their initial assessment. "We need to transport her to County General," Sarah announced. "Her vitals are stable. We want to rule out any cardiac issues." As they prepared to move Karen onto the stretcher, she reached up with a trembling hand and removed her oxygen mask. "Wait," she said weakly, looking directly at Marcus. I'm sorry. I don't know why I—" "Save your strength, Mrs. Whitfield," Marcus said kindly. "We can talk another time if you'd like." The paramedics efficiently transferred Karen to the stretcher. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, her son walked alongside, still holding her hand. The crowd began to disperse, many of them shaking their heads in disbelief at how the morning's events had unfolded. James, the security guard, approached Marcus. "Sir, we'll need a statement from you for our incident report, when you have a moment." "Of course," Marcus replied, checking his watch. Despite everything that had happened, he still needed to pick up Emma's birthday cake. The whole incident had lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours had passed. Angela touched his arm gently. "Your daughter's cake is ready whenever you are. It's on the house today." As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens now silent, the morning sun continued to shine on the parking lot where an ordinary day had turned into something none of the witnesses would soon forget. But the story wasn't over yet. In fact, the most unexpected developments were still to come. To be continued in Part 4. The next morning, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. The incident from yesterday had gone viral. Someone had uploaded a compilation of videos showing both Karen's racist outburst and her subsequent collapse. The comments section was flooded with mixed reactions, some expressing outrage at her behavior, others showing concern for her health, and many praising Marcus's composure throughout the situation. Emma bounded into the kitchen, still excited from her birthday party the previous day. "Dad, my friend said you're famous now." Sarah's mom showed her the video. She paused, studying her father's face. "Are you okay?" Marcus smiled at his daughter. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but what matters is how we handle difficult situations, remember?" Before Emma could respond, Marcus's phone rang. It was James, the security guard from the plaza. "Mr. Johnson, I apologize for calling so early, but there's something you should know. Mrs. Whitfield's son is here at the plaza. He's asking if he could get your contact information. He says his mother would like to speak with you." Marcus felt a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to put the whole incident behind him, but he remembered the genuine remorse in Karen's eyes just before she was taken away in the ambulance. After a moment's consideration, he agreed to meet with her son. An hour later, after dropping Emma at school, Marcus returned to the Riverside shopping plaza. The morning was quieter than yesterday, though he noticed a few people pointing and whispering as he walked toward the coffee shop where Karen's son worked. Inside, Jason Whitfield, Karen's son, was waiting at a corner table. The young man stood up immediately, extending his hand. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming. I'm Jason. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're willing to meet with me." They sat down, and Jason began to share his mother's story. "Mom's in stable condition now. It wasn't a heart attack, thankfully. The doctors say it was a severe panic attack combined with high blood pressure, but they're keeping her for observation." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "The thing is, she's not the same person she was yesterday morning." Jason explained that his mother had watched the viral videos of herself from her hospital bed. She couldn't even finish watching them. She kept crying, saying she didn't recognize herself. The truth is, she's been struggling since Dad passed away last year. She's been angry at the world, but that's no excuse for what she did. Marcus listened quietly, noting the pain and embarrassment in Jason's voice. The young man continued, "She's asked to see you. Not for publicity or anything. The hospital has been keeping reporters away. She needs to make things right. But we completely understand if you don't want to." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from Angela at the bakery. "Turn on the local news. They're talking about yesterday." He pulled up the news on his phone, and Jason leaned in to watch. The reporter was standing outside the shopping plaza. In a time when racial incidents often end in tragedy, this story took an unexpected turn. Witnesses describe how the victim of a racist rant showed compassion to his attacker in her moment of crisis. The incident has sparked a conversation about humanity, forgiveness, and the possibility of change. The report cut to interviews with several witnesses, including Michelle, the nurse who had helped Karen, and Angela from the bakery. Each person described not only Karen's shocking behavior, but also Marcus's dignity and kindness in response. Jason wiped his eyes. "That's why Mom wants to see you. She keeps saying she needs to thank the man who showed her kindness when she least deserved it." Marcus took a deep breath. He thought about Emma's birthday party yesterday, how she had proudly told her friends that her daddy was a hero, not because he had fought back, but because he had stayed calm and helped someone who was mean to him. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "I'll meet with her, but not for the cameras or social media. Some conversations need to happen in private." Jason's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mom's in room 315 at County General. She'll be there until tomorrow afternoon. Would you be willing to visit today?" As Marcus nodded, neither man could have predicted how this meeting would not only change their lives, but would soon impact their entire community in ways they never expected. To be continued in Part 5. County General Hospital's third floor was quiet when Marcus stepped out of the elevator that afternoon. He had changed into a neat blue button-down shirt after leaving work early, carrying a small potted peace lily from the hospital gift shop. Emma's idea when he had called to tell her where he was going. Room 315, he muttered to himself, following the signs. His footsteps echoed in the sterile hallway as nearby nurses glanced at him with curious expressions. Word had spread quickly among the hospital staff about the parking lot incident patient. Outside Karen's room, Marcus paused. Through the half-open door, he could hear the low murmur of a television and quiet conversation. He knocked gently. "Come in," called a voice he recognized as Jason's. Karen Whitfield looked dramatically different from the angry woman of yesterday. She sat propped up in the hospital bed, her designer clothes replaced by a plain hospital gown, her perfectly styled hair now lying flat against her pillows. The makeup was gone, revealing dark circles under her eyes and tear-stained cheeks. When she saw Marcus, her hands began to tremble, and she quickly wiped her eyes with a tissue. Jason stood from his chair, greeting Marcus with a grateful nod. "Hello, Mrs. Whitfield," Marcus said softly, placing the peace lily on her bedside table. "My daughter Emma helped pick this out. She thought you might like something to brighten your room." Karen stared at the plant, then at Marcus, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Your daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking. "After what I said, you and your daughter brought me flowers?" "It's a peace lily," Marcus explained, taking the chair Jason offered him. "Emma says they're good for healing." Karen's shoulders began to shake with quiet sobs. Jason placed a comforting hand on her shoulder as she struggled to compose herself. The television in the background was showing another news report about the incident, and Jason quickly moved to turn it off. "I've been watching those videos all day," Karen said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep hoping it's not really me, that I'm not that person. But I am." She looked directly at Marcus for the first time. "I don't deserve your kindness, Mr. Johnson." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "And kindness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be better than the situation demands." Karen nodded slowly, twisting the tissue in her hands. "The doctors say my collapse was partly due to unmanaged stress and anxiety. After my husband died last year, I let bitterness take over. I started seeing enemies everywhere. But that's not an excuse for what I did." She reached for a folder on her bedside table with shaking hands. "I've written out a formal apology. Jason helped me. We want to release it publicly, but only if you approve. And," she hesitated, "I've enrolled in a 6-week diversity and sensitivity training program. The hospital social worker recommended it." Marcus took the folder but didn't open it. "Mrs. Whitfield." "Karen, please." "Karen," he continued, "public apologies are fine, but real change happens in private moments, in small choices we make every day." "I know," she responded, her voice stronger now. "That's why I also want to volunteer. Jason tells me the community center where he coaches basketball needs help with their after-school program. I used to be a teacher before." She trailed off, looking at the peace lily again. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across the room. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the quiet beeping of medical equipment and distant hospital announcements. "You know," Marcus said finally, "Emma's school is always looking for volunteer reading tutors. Their program focuses on bringing different parts of the community together." Karen's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "You would trust me around children? Around your daughter's school?" "Trust is earned," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "But change has to start somewhere. Why not here?" As they continued talking, none of them noticed Michelle, the nurse from yesterday, watching quietly from the doorway. She smiled to herself before continuing her rounds, knowing she was witnessing something rare and valuable, the beginning of real transformation. But even as this peaceful scene unfolded in room 315, across town, another development was taking place that would add an unexpected twist to their story. To be continued in Part 6. While Marcus was visiting Karen at the hospital, the local news station had dispatched reporter Lisa Chen to Riverside Shopping Plaza to cover what they thought would be a simple follow-up story. However, what she discovered would add another layer to the already complex situation. Standing in the exact spot where yesterday's incident occurred, Lisa was interviewing Angela from Sweet Dreams Bakery when a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Out stepped Robert Williams, the plaza's property owner, accompanied by several business suits. "The timing couldn't be better," Angela whispered to Lisa, turning off her oven mitts. "You might want to keep your camera rolling." Robert Williams, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit, had seen the viral videos. He had rushed back from his vacation in Florida after learning that the incident had occurred on his property. But rather than showing concern about the negative publicity, he had other plans. "Mrs. Chen," he called out, approaching Angela's bakery. "I believe we need to discuss some changes to the plaza's security protocols." His eyes drifted to the camera crew. "And who authorized this media presence on private property?" Lisa Chen, ever the professional, stepped forward with her microphone. "Mr. Williams, we're doing a follow-up story on yesterday's incident. Would you care to comment on the steps the plaza is taking to prevent similar situations?" Williams straightened his tie, clearly pleased to be on camera. "Indeed. After reviewing yesterday's events, we've decided to implement a strict new security policy. We'll be installing additional cameras, increasing security personnel, and enforcing immediate removal of any individuals causing disturbances." "That sounds like a reactive approach," a familiar voice called out. Everyone turned to see James, the security guard, walking up in his uniform. "Sir, With all due respect, I've worked here for 12 years. What happened yesterday wasn't a security failure. It was a human moment that turned into a learning opportunity. Williams frowned. Officer Wilson, this is hardly the time. Actually, Angela interrupted. This is exactly the time. The plaza doesn't need more cameras or guards. What happened yesterday showed us something important. When Karen collapsed, everyone, regardless of their race or background, came together to help. The camera continued rolling as more shop owners emerged from their stores, drawn by the commotion. Michelle, who had just finished her hospital shift and stopped by for coffee, joined the growing crowd. Mr. Williams, Michelle spoke up, still in her scrubs. I was here yesterday. What we witnessed wasn't just a racist incident that ended in a medical emergency. We saw how compassion can transform a situation. Marcus Johnson showed us that. Williams shifted uncomfortably, aware of the camera capturing every moment. While that's all very touching, we have a business to run. Our priority must be preventing negative incidents that could affect property values. Maybe, said Jason Whitfield, who had just arrived for his coffee shop shift, we should focus on building community instead of just protecting property values. My mother's actions yesterday were inexcusable, but what happened afterward, the kindness she received, that's changing her. That's changing all of us. Lisa Chen's camera operator zoomed in on the growing group of plaza regulars who had gathered. The story was shifting before her eyes from a simple follow-up piece to something much more meaningful. What if, Angela suggested, her eyes bright with inspiration, instead of more security cameras, we used this moment to start something positive? The plaza could host community dialogue sessions. We could create spaces for people to connect, to understand each other better. James nodded enthusiastically. We could partner with local organizations, maybe even start a plaza community council where everyone has a voice. Williams looked around at the determined faces surrounding him. His carefully planned security announcement had transformed into something entirely different. The camera was still rolling, capturing his reaction. After a long moment, he sighed. Well, it seems I may have misread the situation. Perhaps we should discuss these community initiatives. He managed a small smile, though I still think we need at least one new security camera. The tension broke as people chuckled. Lisa Chen turned to her camera with a smile. What started as a tragic incident at Riverside Shopping Plaza has sparked an unexpected movement. While Karen Whitfield recovers in the hospital, her actions have inadvertently initiated a conversation about community, compassion, and change. Live from Riverside Plaza, this is Lisa Chen. But even as the crowd dispersed and the cameras stopped rolling, none of them realized that the most surprising part of this story was yet to come. 1 month later, the Riverside Shopping Plaza had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The empty storefront that once housed a defunct electronics store had been converted into the Community Bridge Center, a space dedicated to fostering dialogue and understanding among local residents. On this particular Saturday morning, Karen Whitfield stood nervously outside the center's doors. It was her first day as a volunteer, following her completion of the diversity training program. She had lost weight since the incident, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple blouse and slacks. The flashy jewelry was gone, but something else had taken its place, a quiet humility in her eyes. Inside, Marcus was helping Emma set up chairs for the morning's reading program. When the door chimed, Emma looked up and waved enthusiastically. Hi, Mrs. Karen. Dad said you're going to help us read stories today. Karen's eyes welled with tears, still amazed by the child's innocent acceptance. Over the past month, she had met with Emma and Marcus several times, each meeting helping to heal the wounds of that fateful day. The kids are really excited, Marcus said warmly. We told them you used to be a teacher. Before Karen could respond, more people began arriving. Michelle, the nurse who had helped her during her collapse, now volunteered as the center's health education coordinator. James, the security guard, had been promoted to community relations manager, though he still wore his uniform with pride. The morning's program was special. Local children would read stories they had written about their own experiences with prejudice and acceptance. As families filled the chairs, Karen noticed something remarkable. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all there to listen and learn. Robert Williams, the plaza owner, slipped in quietly and took a seat in the back. Since the viral video of his confrontation with the shop owners, he had undergone his own transformation. The Community Bridge Center had been his idea, or at least, he let everyone think it was. Emma was the first to share her story. She walked to the front, holding a hand-illustrated book. "My story is called The Day My Dad Became a Real Superhero," she began. Karen felt her chest tighten as she realized what the story would be about. As Emma read, describing how her father had shown kindness to someone who had been cruel, Karen noticed many people in the audience wiping away tears. She wasn't the only one affected by the events of that day. Jason, who had finished his shift at the coffee shop, sat beside his mother and squeezed her hand. Since the incident, the relationship had grown stronger. He had watched his mother struggle, learn, and slowly begin to change. After the readings, as people mingled over coffee and pastries donated by Angela's bakery, Lisa Chen from the local news station arrived with her camera crew. But this time, they weren't there to cover controversy. They were documenting the center's success as a model for other communities. "Mrs. Whitfield," Lisa approached with her microphone, "would you be willing to share how the center came to be? Your story has inspired similar initiatives in other cities." Karen looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "The center exists because of a moment of darkness that turned into light," she began, her voice steady. "I was the darkness, my prejudice, my anger, my fear. But the light came from everyone else. From Marcus's forgiveness, from this community's willingness to transform a terrible incident into something beautiful." As she spoke, Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Mrs. Karen, will you help me read my new story next week? It's about a grumpy butterfly who learns to be kind." Karen knelt down to Emma's level, just as she used to do with her students years ago. "I would love to," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The camera captured this moment, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. The transformation of both a person and a community happening in small, genuine moments. But even as the Community Bridge Center celebrated its early success, forces were at work that would test their newfound unity. The biggest challenge to their community was about to emerge, and it would require more than just kindness to overcome. 6 months after the parking lot incident, the Riverside Shopping Plaza was hosting its first Community Unity Festival. Colorful banners hung between shops, local vendors had set up stalls, and children's laughter filled the air. But the festival almost didn't happen, due to events that had tested the community just 2 weeks earlier. A major development company had offered Robert Williams an astronomical sum to buy the plaza. Their plan was to demolish it and build luxury condominiums. The old Williams would have accepted without hesitation, but now he faced a difficult decision. The Community Bridge Center had become a model for other cities. News stations from across the country had covered their story. Karen Whitfield, once known as Parking Lot Karen, had been interviewed on national television about her transformation. She now led diversity workshops and spoke at schools about the dangers of prejudice and the power of forgiveness. When word of the potential sale leaked, the plaza community mobilized. Angela Chen organized a petition. James gathered testimonials about the center's impact. Mitchell documented the health benefits of having a community gathering space. But it was Emma's letter to Mr. Williams that ultimately made the difference. "Dear Mr. Williams," she had written in her childish handwriting, "did you know that 3 kids in my class learned to read because of our center? Mrs. Karen says that when people have a place to come together, hearts can change. My dad says that's worth more than all the money in the world." Standing on the makeshift stage at the festival, Robert Williams cleared his throat into the microphone. The crowd grew quiet. Karen, Marcus, and Emma stood together near the front, all wearing t-shirts that read "Bridges Not Barriers." "6 months ago," Williams began, "I thought this plaza was just a business investment. Today, I'm announcing that I've not only rejected the development company's offer, but I'm placing the Riverside Shopping Plaza into a community trust. This space will always belong to all of us." The crowd erupted in cheers. Jason hugged his mother, who was crying openly. Angela brought out a massive cake decorated with a bridge design. James stood proudly in his uniform, remembering how a simple parking spot dispute had led to all of this. Lisa Chen, who had become a regular presence at the plaza, was filming again. But this time, she set her microphone down and joined the celebration. Her latest documentary about the plaza's transformation was set to air next month. As the festival continued, Karen found herself sitting with Marcus and Emma at one of the picnic tables. You know, she said, watching the diverse crowd enjoying the festivities, I drove past my old parking spot yesterday and just sat there for a while. I couldn't believe how angry I was that day, how blind. Sometimes, Marcus replied, helping Emma with her ice cream cone, we need to hit rock bottom before we can look up and see the light. Emma looked between them thoughtfully. My teacher says that when bad things happen, we can choose to make them into good things, like when you turn compost into flowers. Karen laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that 6 months ago seemed impossible. Your daughter is very wise, Marcus. She gets it from her mom, he smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes as he touched the wedding ring he still wore. The festival continued into the evening. The community bridge center stayed open late, its walls now covered with photographs documenting their journey. Among them was a screenshot from the viral video, placed next to a recent picture of Karen reading to children. Below it was a simple caption, Change begins with choice. As the sun set over Riverside Shopping Plaza, casting long shadows across the parking lot where it all began, the community gathered for a group photo. Karen stood next to Marcus and Emma, surrounded by faces that had become family. James, Angela, Michelle, Jason, Mr. Williams, Lisa Chen, they had all played their parts in this unexpected story of transformation. Emma tugged on Karen's sleeve. Mrs. Karen, can we take a picture just us? For my memory book? As Karen knelt beside Emma and Marcus, she realized that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best changes. A parking spot had been the beginning. But this moment, these people, this community, this was the real destination. The end.